when they finally needed me. I don't really know why I'm writing this here. Maybe because no one in my real life would believe me if I told them what my family did, or maybe because some part of me still wants someone, anyone, to say, "You didn't deserve that." I'm 32 now, and for most of my life, I've been invisible to the people who were supposed to see me first. Growing up, it was always my sister, Hannah. The sun revolved around her, the air bent to her laughter, and the rest of us were just there to keep the planets in orbit. She was the golden child, smart, funny, popular, the kind of person who wins, most likely to succeed, before she even finishes high school. And then there was me. I wasn't the rebel, or the problem kid. I was quiet. Too quiet, apparently. Sensitive, awkward, the kind of kid who cried if he yelled. My mom hated that. She'd tell me to man up when I was 6. My dad called me our little ghost, because I'd disappear into my room after dinner, and no one would notice until morning. They thought it was funny. The truth was, I didn't want to be around them. Every dinner was about Hannah, her grades, her friends, her new cheer routine. If I mentioned something from my day, it was either ignored or mocked. I remember once, in 5th grade, I won a small art contest. I brought the ribbon home, excited, and my mom looked at it and said, "Oh, that's nice. But don't leave it on the counter, Hannah's SAT prep stuff is there." That ribbon went in the trash the next day. Not out of anger. Just because it didn't feel like it mattered. I think the first time I realized I was really alone in that house was when I got sick in middle school. A bad flu, 103 fever, couldn't get out of bed. My mom told me to stop being dramatic, and went to Hannah's track meet 3 towns over. I threw up twice on myself. No one came home until after dark. I cleaned myself up and slept on the bathroom floor because it was cold tile. The next morning, Mom was annoyed that I'd used her towel. That's the kind of thing people don't believe when you tell them later. They think, no one's parents are that cruel. But neglect doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just doesn't answer when you cry. When I was 16, Hannah got her first car. A brand new Honda Civic, shiny silver. My dad handed her the keys like it was a coronation ceremony. I remember how proud he looked. A month later, I asked if I could take driver's ed too. He said, "You can't even afford gas money, Eli. Be realistic." That was the moment I realized the rules were different for us. For her, everything was an investment. For me, everything was a liability. So I started staying away. I'd walk around town until it was dark just to avoid going home. I worked part-time at a hardware store, saved what little I could. My boss, Mr. Kennedy, used to slip me free sandwiches from the gas station across the street. He was the first adult who ever asked, "You doing okay, kid?" and actually waited for an answer. Then came Hannah's graduation party. It was a big deal. Our backyard turned into a carnival of folding chairs, streamers, and catered food. I'd been helping set up all morning, hanging lights, hauling tables. I was sweaty, sunburned, and starving by the time the guests arrived. At one point, one of Hannah's friends asked me to take a group photo. I said sure, snapped the picture, and realized my family was posing too, without me. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Wait, one with me in it?" My mom looked annoyed. "Eli, don't make this about you." Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. Later that night, my dad found me sitting behind the garage. He was drunk, happy, nostalgic. He said, "You should be proud of your sister, son. Not jealous." That word, jealous, burned in my chest. I hadn't said a word about jealousy. I'd just asked to be in one photo. I left that night. No screaming fight, no dramatic farewell. Just packed a duffel bag and walked out around midnight, while they were still laughing in the yard. No one came after me. No one called the next day. I crashed on a friend's couch for a week. Then another. Then a relative's spare room until they needed the space. At 17, I was effectively homeless. I finished high school by the skin of my teeth, working full-time at that hardware store. My parents didn't show up for graduation. I guess they were still tired from Hannah's college orientation trip. When I turned 18, my grandmother, my mom's mom, mailed me a card with $50 and a note. "I see you, Eli. Don't let them tell you otherwise." I cried for an hour when I read that. She was the only one who ever called on my birthday after that. Years later, I found out through a mutual acquaintance that my parents told people I'd gone bad, that I was unstable, and needed space. It was easier than admitting they just didn't care. And maybe I started to believe them. When everyone tells you you're the problem, it's hard not to wonder if they're right. But that's the thing about ghosts. You get used to being unseen. You start to realize you can go anywhere, do anything, and they'll never know. I built my life from nothing, one scraped paycheck at a time. But back then, I still thought maybe, someday, they'd realize what they'd done. Someday they'd come looking for me. Spoiler, they didn't. Not for a long, long time. At 17, freedom didn't feel like freedom. It felt like standing on a cliff with no one behind you and no ground beneath your feet. I kept the job at the hardware store after graduation, renting a tiny studio over a pawn shop. The bathroom leaked, and the walls smelled faintly of cigarettes, but it was mine. For the first time, no one could barge in or tell me I was too sensitive. I ate ramen most nights and listened to the creak of the ceiling fan to fall asleep. Life wasn't good, but it was mine. For the next few years, I just survived. Work, sleep, repeat. I learned how to fix things: drywall, appliances, cars. Mr. Kennedy taught me how to handle customers, how to tell when someone's lying, how to look people in the eye without apologizing for existing. He became something like a father figure, though he never said it out loud. He'd ask about my weekend, slip me an extra 50 at Christmas, invite me to cookouts with his family. His wife always packed me leftovers to take home. I didn't realize until much later how much that filled the holes my own family left. At 20, I took night classes at the community college, basic mechanics, small business management. I couldn't afford university, but I wanted to build something, anything, that wouldn't collapse under someone else's control. Meanwhile, I never heard from my family. Not once. No birthdays, no holidays. Not even when my grandmother passed away when I was 22. I found out from a Facebook post. My mom's caption was, "Rest easy, Mom. I know you were proud of your grandkids." There was a picture of Hannah at the funeral. Not me. It took everything in me not to drive there that day. But I knew it wasn't my goodbye they wanted. I drove to a park instead and sat by a pond until sunset. I whispered thank you to the wind, for the card, for the $50, for seeing me when no one else did. Then I went home, changed the oil in my car, and went back to work the next morning. By 25, I had enough saved to lease a small garage. Kennedy helped me with the paperwork, even co-signed because my credit was garbage. I opened Eli's Auto and Repair, nothing fancy, just 2 bays, a coffee machine, and a sign I painted myself. First year was brutal. Second year, I broke even. Third year, I was doing well enough to hire a part-timer. That's when I met Claire. She came in with a busted alternator and stayed to talk long after her car was fixed. She was funny, smart, the kind of person who listens when you talk. We started dating 6 months later, and for the first time, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. I told her about my family in bits and pieces. She never pushed, just listened. Sometimes she'd say, "You know, it's okay to mourn people who are still alive." I didn't know how to explain that I hadn't even started mourning yet. We got married 2 years later in a tiny courthouse ceremony. Kennedy and his wife stood as witnesses. No one from my family was invited. Not because I was bitter, but because it would have felt like inviting strangers. Life got quieter, steadier. I bought a house, a fixer-upper with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds. Every nail I hammered, every wall I patched, felt like reclaiming something I'd been denied. By 30, I had employees, regular customers, a wife who loved me, and a life that finally felt like mine. The ghosts of the past were quieter, though they never really left. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I'd wonder if my family ever thought about me. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Eli? It's Mom." Her voice sounded older, thinner. I froze. I hadn't heard that voice in over a decade. "Hi," I said flat. "Oh, sweetheart," she breathed. "It's been so long. We've missed you." I almost laughed. Missed me? They hadn't even looked for me. "I heard about your business," she went on. "You've really made something of yourself." I didn't respond. My heart was pounding. She filled the silence like she always did, nervous and rehearsed. "Listen, I know things were difficult back then. But your father and I were just doing our best. We thought maybe we could start fresh." I knew what was coming before she said it. Years of silence don't end in a phone call unless someone needs something. So I asked, "Is everything okay?" There was a pause. "Your dad's had some health problems. And your sister's been going through a rough time. It's just been hard, Eli. We could use some help." There it was. The reason. I didn't answer right away. I just said, "I'll think about it." And then I hung up. Claire found me sitting on the porch that evening, staring at nothing. I told her what happened. She said quietly, "You don't owe them anything." I knew she was right. But part of me, some broken, hopeful piece, still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they changed. So I told her, "Maybe I'll go see them." She looked at me with that patient sadness she gets when she knows I'm about to hurt myself. "Okay," she said. "But promise me one thing, don't go alone." I promised. I meant it. Hannah's perfect world began to crack in her late 20s. The grades, the accolades, the smiles, they didn't shield her from the weight of adult life. Her first job after college was brutal, long hours, impossible deadlines, and office politics she hadn't been prepared for. She had believed that hard work and charm could carry her through anything, but reality proved stubbornly indifferent. She called me one night, voice trembling and filled with exhaustion, admitting she felt invisible in a sea of expectations. She spoke of anxiety that gnawed at her sleep, the sense that every mistake would define her permanently, and the mounting pressure of keeping up appearances. I didn't scold her. I listened. For once, she needed someone who would simply hear her, not judge or lecture. We spoke in fragments at first, awkward silences punctuating our conversations, then slowly, she began to confide more. I learned about the colleagues who undermined her, the supervisors who dismissed her ideas, and the creeping loneliness she had ignored for years. It was a strange, unspoken role reversal. The golden child now seemed fragile, unsure, and alone in ways that echoed my own youth. Meanwhile, my parents' facade began to crumble. Their health deteriorated, their finances faltered, and the relationships they once manipulated began to fracture. The house they had so meticulously curated to showcase perfection now felt like a stage empty of actors, the illusions hollow. I observed from a distance, noting the irony. They had ignored me, dismissed my needs, and now, years later, they were vulnerable and desperate. I had a thriving business, a loving wife, and a life built on respect and stability. They had neglected, overlooked, and dismissed, only to face consequences they had never anticipated. Their golden family image was now tarnished, while I had become the person they had failed to nurture. I didn't rush to intervene. I didn't call to chastise or to offer unsolicited advice. I let the natural course of events unfold, silently bearing witness to the collapse of the perfection they had always valued over genuine relationships. When they reached out again, I understood immediately what they wanted: assistance, attention, validation. I allowed them to think they still had a place in my life, but I set boundaries that were invisible yet absolute. Each interaction was carefully measured. I responded selectively, offered advice or support indirectly, and let them assume they were influencing my life when, in reality, I remained entirely in control. I helped anonymously, sending Hannah small gifts to her doorstep and paying minor bills when I knew she would struggle. I offered my parents resources, recommendations for healthcare, financial planning, even home repairs, but never personally engaged. They thought they were re-entering my world. I was simply creating a controlled environment where I dictated every term. It was quiet, subtle, and profoundly satisfying. It wasn't cruelty, it was reclamation. They had defined my worth with neglect, and now I defined their access to me. When they sought praise or affirmation, I withheld it. When they begged for advice or guidance, I provided it only at arm's length. I became a ghost again, not forced by absence, but by choice. My existence in their lives was present enough to be noticed, but always untouchable. I watched as they floundered through their own shortcomings, the consequences of their earlier disregard subtly mirrored in their struggles. The balance of power had shifted, and for the first time, I felt no resentment, only quiet satisfaction in maintaining control and protecting my own life. This was revenge not of theatrics or confrontation, but of subtlety, patience, and permanence. It was the art of being present without surrendering myself, of being seen without being claimed. And in that silence, I discovered a strength I had never known before, that the past could be acknowledged, but it would never dictate my future. By the time I fully recognized the scope of my family's reach, or rather, their lack thereof, I realized that some connections were irretrievable. My parents had long since proven their inability to offer love or recognition, and Hannah, though struggling, was forging her own path without me. It became clear that I had no obligation to repair the broken links they had shattered years ago. I made a conscious choice: permanent estrangement. Not out of bitterness, but from understanding. I informed them, clearly and without malice, that I would no longer engage in personal contact. Letters were returned unopened, phone calls unanswered. They were free to live in their illusions, and I was free to live in reality, my reality. Even with the estrangement, I maintained boundaries that allowed for civility when necessary, such as legal or formal matters, but I never invited them into my daily life. I built a network of friends, mentors, and chosen family who provided the love, respect, and acknowledgement that had been absent from my upbringing. Their absence was no longer a wound, but a defined space I had filled with growth, accomplishment, and meaningful relationships. The permanence of the estrangement was both liberating and protective. I no longer carried the weight of their expectations, their neglect, or their intermittent attempts at contact. I could make decisions for myself without guilt or manipulation. I could celebrate achievements without feeling their judgment or absence. The ghost of my childhood had finally been exorcised. Time passed, and life unfolded in ways I could finally shape. I found joy in the ordinary: mornings opening the shop, the smell of motor oil mingling with fresh coffee, evenings with Claire and our laughter echoing through our home. I discovered that closure wasn't a grand confrontation or a dramatic reconciliation. It was the quiet, deliberate act of building a life so complete that the past could no longer intrude. I thought about my family sometimes, not with longing, not with anger, but with clarity. They were chapters in my life, not the authors of my story. Their absence had shaped me, but it did not define me. I thrived in a world beyond their reach, and in that thriving, I found peace. I reflected on the subtle revenge I had enacted, not to punish, but to reclaim agency. I realized the ultimate freedom was choosing who could exist in my life and on what terms. I no longer needed validation from those who had failed me. My validation came from creating a home filled with love, trust, and laughter. Closure came quietly, my business running smoothly, Claire by my side, friendships deep and reciprocal. I had learned that some people are meant to exist in memory only, and some doors, once closed, remain closed. The estrangement was permanent, But it was also protective, allowing me to live fully without interference or expectation. For the first time, I was truly free. And that freedom, built on self-respect, resilience, and the deliberate construction of a life worth living, felt like home.